Jewish voices. So he has done what many of the people in the film we just saw did, and part of that is making himself very unpopular in some quarters, but not really. So, thank you very much for your attendance tonight.
My pleasure. Let me pass this around. It's a text of a speech that I gave in the Kootenays a couple of months ago. There's a QR code. You can take it on your camera, and then it'll give you access to it, and you can print it out at home and read it. The title of the paper is Zionism, the Root of the Crisis in Israel and Palestine. The regime of Jewish supremacy based on Zionist theology upon which the state of Israel has been built must be torn down. I think these are beautiful, wonderful people here, but I think there's an additional step that needs to be added to what they're doing and talking about. And that is, I think they have to organize to take apart the Israeli system. It's a settler colonial system where Jews from Europe landed on the indigenous people there and imposed an apartheid system of oppression that you see all the time. So when you look at just violence versus violence, and you see people come apart from that and say, I'm not doing violence anymore, that's wonderful. But it's not going to be enough to address what's been going on for 75 years. And that is having to get to the root of that problem. There are many things that struck me, this is the first time I saw the film, it's quite moving. They talk about a Jewish state. For 75 years in the West and beyond, the idea of having a Jewish state has been legitimate. It's particularly been legitimized in the context of the Nazi slaughter of Jews. But a Jewish state means a state that privileges Jews over non-Jews. And you're seeing the results. When people are oppressed because they are not Jews, they're Palestinians, they don't take it. They don't like their homeland, their farmlands, their villages, their traditional places where they lived for hundreds of years taken from them. They don't like living on cut up land behind walls without water, subject to checkpoints and all that. They're never going to take that. They can be suppressed for a time. They can be exposed to horrible violence and suppression, but that's not going to last. Their children won't tolerate that. The only way to get to the root of this is to get to the root of this, which is to do away with a state that privileges Jews over non-Jews. I don't like a Jewish state. I don't like a Christian state. I don't like a Muslim state. I believe in a liberal, small L, not capital L, small L, liberal state where all citizens have equal rights, like Canada. And that's not to say that Canada is a settler colonial state as well. But we don't have different rights before the law. When you go to a court, you don't have a different system for one set of Canadians and a different system for another. And you don't have militarized campaigns of one part of the population against another. And that's what it's been taking to create and maintain a Jewish state. They talk a lot of the lines that you realize only after watching the film after a while. They're mouthing lines at the beginning of the film that by the end of the film, they don't believe it. They talk about only a Jewish state can allow Jews to live in security. Jews aren't living in security in Israel. 1,200 Jews just died because Hamas attacked them. Hamas was breaking out of the prison. You don't have to like what Hamas did. That's not a matter if you're liking it. Hamas is an expression of the fact that people are not going to take this. They referred to Sabra and Shatila, the massacre, and that happened in Lebanon in 1982. A couple of thousand civilians, Palestinians, were murdered by the fascist militia backed by Ariel Sharon, who was the prime minister at that time. Why? They wanted to clean out any possible support for the PLO. That's the way settler colonialism works. It works not only in Israel, it worked that way in Algeria, it worked that way in India, it works that way in Africa. People don't take to it, and there's no reason they should take to it. And we have a responsibility to side with the people who are on the receiving end of this, to help them liberate themselves from this. Both the Jews who are the oppressors and the Palestinians who are the oppressed, to create a society of equality before the law. the question in there, I guess it's a throwaway line, why do they hate us so much? This isn't magic. Why does anybody who's got a boot on their neck hate the person who's got the boot on their neck? The young woman who ends up being one of the members of the Combatants for Peace, she talked about clarifying the power of relationship, making clear, as if you could ever get to the point where somebody is permanently suppressed and defeated. You can kill them, but if they have the ability to push back, they will. Interestingly enough, as Combatants for Peace, I happened to meet a woman named Nurit Peled. I don't know, those of you who live in Vancouver remember there was a 2005, there was a World Peace Forum in Vancouver. Nurit Peled is a renowned Israeli educator. She's done a tremendous amount of education and research exposing the nature of Israeli textbooks. Israelis accuse Palestinians of hating Jews and having anti-Jewish propaganda. She has written documentation of all kinds on Israeli textbooks showing that what the Israelis accuse the Palestinians of is in fact the inverse, that there's an institutionalized propagandization of the Israeli state, of young Israelis, to teach them to see Palestinians as lesser, to rationalize their oppression and stuff like this. She's done a great deal of work on this. She is an amazing woman. I was chair of a forum in St. Andrew's Wesley Church with her and Rachel Corey's mother, Cindy Corey. And I'm listening to the two of them talk, and I felt like I was listening to a couple of prophets. It was just, I felt overwhelmed emotionally. Both of them lost their daughters. Cindy Corey lost her daughter Rachel to an Israeli bulldozer that plowed right over her when she was trying to stop them from destroying a Palestinian home. And Nurit Peled's daughter died at the hands of a Palestinian suicide bomber. And both of them see through to what it's about. They aren't shortcutting and they're refusing to hate the victims. They have a clear perspective on what has caused all this and what is necessary to overcome it. And they are continuing to be active against this and trying to educate and mobilize people about that. And one other thing that came from the film I thought was really interesting. One of the Israeli women was talking to another, and she says, "Okay, we got to realize this. We're going to have to give up Eretz Israel, which is the West Bank. That's biblical Israel. We're going to have to give that up, and the Palestinians are going to have to give up the right of return." The other woman says, "Why should we give up the right of return?" You know, if you think about it, 75 years ago, Palestinians were ethnically cleansed from Israel. They haven't given up. I was talking to a woman today whose grandmother died with the key to her house in her hand. And that's very common with Palestinians. They have a tremendous attachment to the homes and villages that they lived in. And the right of return is something that Zionists are horrified by, because it would mean, by definition, the end of a Jewish state. It would be, there are about half and half of the population between the river and the sea are Palestinians and Jews. If Palestinians return, there might be a Palestinian majority. That would mean, okay, horror of horrors, that it wouldn't be a Jewish majority. If you did build a state where the minority enjoy rights, like in a liberal democracy, you live with that fact, so what? I'm a Jew in Canada, I'm a minority, that's not a problem for me. You know, that's the nature of a liberal democracy, and I think that's what we should all be striving for. Thank you. Anyway, that's my reflections on it. If you have any comments to make or questions, let's open it up.
I have a question about the Palestinians that live inside Israel. What is their status? Their
Stance or status?
status?
Status is second-class citizenship. There's forget what the name of the organization, there's a Palestinian-Israeli civil rights group that has documented, if you email me, you got my email,
Yeah.
that there's 46 laws in Israel that apply differentially to Palestinians inside Israel. The only democracy in the Middle East. Yeah, it's a really horrible situation.
So how did they, like, what's the population of Palestinians?
I think it's about 20% of Israeli population is Palestinian.
Palestinian or Arab?
Palestinians.
Because there are a lot of Arabs in Haifa, in Akron, etc., Akko, who do have rights, who serve in the IDF, who have been members of the parliament, the Knesset in Israel. What do you say about them?
I would like to know who they are, what their status is, because as far as I know, Palestinians who were not expelled in 1948 and their descendants cannot serve in the Israeli army.
Expelled or asked to leave by Jordan, by Egypt, etc.?
Expelled.
I don't agree.
I know that because that is the official propaganda line from 1948, that people were asked to leave. Have you read the book, The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine? There's an Israeli historian who had to leave the country because he was subject to so much abuse. He's come back since. Ilan Pape. I recommend the book, Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine. He goes into great detail. He and other members of what the group called the New Historians did an exhaustive search of the historical record. There is no such instance of any of those countries or regimes inviting people to leave. Not one. And he documents this in great detail. And there are a whole other list of propaganda lines and slogans from the Israeli government and from the Zionist movement that he thoroughly debunks with factual research. I cannot commend that book too highly. I think it will change your life if you read it.
Can you repeat the name of the author?
ILANPAPPE.
IALM?
ILAN Pape, The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine. And there's another book that I would read in parallel, and that's by Rashid, R-A-S-H-I-D, Khalidi, K-H-A-L-I-D-A. K-H-A-L-I-D-A, Khalidi.
D-I.
All right. And that's the 100 Years' War on Palestine, which goes back to the Balfour Declaration and the machinations of the British and all that. Very powerful book, another classic with impeccable research. Let me tell you something, brother. I read these books, and I thought as you did. And it just floored me to see how this is an elaborate propaganda construction to rationalize the ethnic cleansing of a people. And if you look at it, Theodor Herzl, the founder of political Zionism, in 1896 in the book, The Jewish State, said we can't have all these people living there because it won't be a Jewish state. And they actually created the Zionist movement in the mid-1930s, the World Zionist Congress, created something called a transfer committee. You know what that's a euphemism for? An ethnic cleansing mechanism to plan this. There was a man in the original government in 1948, his name escapes me at the moment, whose job it was in the lead up to all this and afterwards to continue to ethnically cleanse them. And in response, just factually, if people left that way, how is it that 500 villages were physically destroyed to ensure that they would never be allowed to return? It doesn't square with the reality. These are propaganda lines to rationalize what happened.
I have a very dear friend, she's Palestinian, and her family were forced out in 1948. And she said her parents thought, oh, well, maybe they just have to go for a week or something, right? They can come back. Well, they're stateless and they've never been able to come back. And when she's gone back to visit in Jerusalem, she goes to these markets where they're selling old things. And she finds all this old Arabic relics from 1948 from people's homes where they had taken everything. And so she tries to buy as much as she can, and keys are a big thing there. So, yeah, so she is searching and she finds all these Arab artifacts from that time. It's very, very sad.
Repatriation, as is happening with artifacts taken from the peoples here, relocated to
Yeah.
Europe.
Yeah.
Same
Yeah.
process.
But she just says to the people that are selling the stuff, she says, "So, where is this from?" And she doesn't tell them who she is. And they say, "Oh, it's from some old Arab's home."
I would like you to talk a little more about if there wasn't Zionism, what would have happened to all the Jewish people who lived in Europe? Because obviously, the reason why Britain and other powers allowed and were behind Zionism is because what happened to the Jewish people. And they wanted security and a home.
Let's go back a little further. Why wasn't Britain allowing Jews into Britain? Why wasn't Canada allowing Jews
They were
into Canada?
racist.
And they said, fine, we'll put them on the Palestinians. If the issue was how to save the Jews, there were a host of other ways rather than foisting them on the Palestinians and displacing the indigenous population.
But if you strongly believe that the people needed a home finally of their own because of all the millions that were murdered and exterminated,
If who believed that?
the world powers,
Well, the world powers, I would suggest to you, were being very cynical. They were Jew haters themselves. There's a book written by a famous bureaucrat in Canada who he was in charge of immigration during the Second World War. He said, "None is too many," referring to Jewish immigration. That same guy was a Zionist. There were a lot of Christian Zionists who are Jew haters who want Jews in Israel. This is not a benign ideology. If your concern is the welfare and well-being of Jews, you accept them as refugees. You don't foist them on a third party. And you don't insist that there's something wrong with the third party when they don't want to have to foist it on them. And the irony is that when Jewish immigration started there, the Palestinians welcomed them. Only when they realized that their land was being bought up and confiscated and they were being expelled, did the national movement start saying, "Whoa!" And this is perfectly understandable. I mean, nobody's going to take kindly to or.
so where those leaders went wrong was in not allowing everyone to belong and not, stopping taking away their businesses and their homes. Had that not happened, then maybe they would have built a relationship of some sort.
If they had been willing to accept
But why
refugees,
didn't that happen?
because they were racist anti-Semites,
No, I mean, why
anti-Jews.
didn't the people who went to Israel, why did they not build on a country where everyone was accepted?
Because they were the subject of the Zionist movement, which wanted them as fodder for their nation building for a Jewish state, an explicitly Jewish state that privileged Jews over non-Jews.
And why did they want that?
They thought this, read my paper, they thought this was a valid response to anti-Semitism in Europe.
Right, they weren't wrong.
Well,
If you're oppressed for years and years, and you go through World War II, would you not want to be safe and home?
this doctrine was created in 1896. This was part of the nationalist movements that were growing in Europe. This was the Jewish version of the nationalisms that were growing in Europe. There was Polish nationalism, Russian nationalism, German nationalism. This was Jewish nationalism. And their goal was to create a Jewish state. You say they weren't wrong. I say they were wrong. I believe in universal responses and solutions to social problems, not nationalistic ones that privilege one people over another.
Okay, so where my history went wrong is that I didn't know how far back that movement went.
The movement went
I
back
thought it
further than that. It went back to the mid-19th century. The first Zionists were Christians who wanted Jews out of Britain.
Okay, now I'm.
It's a sinister ideology.
Okay.
So where did the Balfour Declaration come from?
Balfour was a British cabinet member during the First World War. He was an anti-Semite to the bone. He wanted to get Jews on side in the First World War with Britain because Britain was losing at that time. And it was fine for him to sign off Palestine to Zionists as the price because it wouldn't be a price that he paid. It would be a price paid by the Palestinians. I forget his name. It was a Jewish member of that same British cabinet at that time, rejected Balfour and his declaration, said, we want to live in Britain. We don't want the creation of a Jewish state where we will be seen as not worthy of or not have a right to live in Britain as everyone else does. And in fact, we might be seen as fifth columnists for a Jewish state somewhere else.
So what was the Zionist influence over Balfour?
I think ideological. He was a Zionist because he wanted Jews out of there, and this was a price using the backing of the British government for the creation of a Jewish state that would get Jews on side the Allied cause in World War I.
So where does Zionism arise out of Judaism?
I read the paper, but it's Theodor Herzl, 1896, writes The Jewish State, where he lays out the map, the whole plan for creating it. And he says explicitly, it will be a colony. It will be an encampment at the edge of the jungle, where we will be civilization on the edge of barbarism. He doesn't want to integrate himself into the region. He wants to be the European outpost. We will do it in cooperation with the governments of Europe. We will be at their service. They will back us, very much what has been developed between Israel and the United States and Britain and France, and Germany. Without that external support, Israel wouldn't exist.
So how does Zionism arise within the synagogue?
That's a total inversion because the original Zionists were atheists, totally secular, nationalists. It is, and in fact, Orthodox Judaism rejects, or has in the past, there are now branches that have embraced it, initially rejected it as apostasy, that this is a violation of the Bible. The next year in Jerusalem is a figure of speech where Jews will be worthy of the promised land when the Messiah comes. It's not a physical incarnation of a state. So, I mean, this whole thing has got all kinds of elements.
I was just going to say, I've read a small part of Ilan Paquet's book, and the business of the British involvement in the Middle East is heavily ridden with agenda, selfish agenda that served Britain, period. The beginnings of that book is such an eye-opener. Once you pick your way through his description of Britain's agenda behind a lot of the things that they did, enabling Zionism, et cetera, you realize, wait a second, that looks like what happened in India, right here, all over the place. It's really, really hard to, yes, I know you're from Scotland, but it's really, really hard.
This is a parallel I'm finding. The Scots resisted the Romans.
There you
and the Scots preserved their independence by fighting for it. So essentially.
They were terrorists.
From whose point of view?
Exactly.
Exactly.
And so here we have the Palestinians as spokesmen for the Scots, right? And the Israelis as the Romans.
As David Ben-Gurion himself, first prime minister, in British papers was called terrorist because he mocked people. Now, I want to bring something up. I'd like to bring
This
something.
lady over here had her hand up. In the back there.
Well, are you done?
No, go ahead.
I wanted to, well, it's your call.
Go ahead.
You know, you listen to this, and I've read a lot about them, and there are so many players in history to build up to this point.
Oh, yes.
So that's history. And yeah, we can see it somewhere. We have to say, well, hold on. Yeah, we know it. That happened. Those guys are bad. Those guys are bad. Those are good, good, good. What do we do now? And I often wondered, well, I heard it in another program I was watching, and they were that one of the theories was as long as Netanyahu is in power, and I can't remember the other, well, when Yasser Arafat, he lost, they had talks, but he was not ready to change. He had that attitude of fight for it all.
No, that's not so.
Well, this is it's almost the same as, it's that slogan of from sea to sea.
From the river to the sea.
Yeah. And so he had said
But
that,
you're confusing
he had
several
said
things.
that in a speech. He had said that on TV. I saw it in a speech.
In 1988, the PLO recognized Israel.
Yeah, yes. But he would not agree, so they had talks, and he cut off talks because he would not.
No, it's
That was
really
it.
perfect.
But my point, my point is you have these dogs of war in power. Will that attitude or that mindset ever change until they are pushed aside and a new
No.
set of thinkers are in place like the combatants for peace?
No.
So somehow, because it's just like, two dogs fighting and they won't stop.
No, but that makes it sound like equals. It's not two dogs.
Yeah,
It's an attack dog and a chihuahua.
yeah,
Netanyahu is writing a far-right cabinet, one member of which, Bezalel Smotrich, describes himself with pride as a homophobe fascist. That's the caliber of people that make up that government. They are not only committing genocide in Gaza, they are ethnically cleansing the West Bank as the world's attention is focused on Gaza. The United States keeps drawing red lines while it feeds them the weaponry to continue this massacre. It's outrageous. So that's why my heart is with the encampment kids and with the people in the United States and in Europe and elsewhere who are trying to force the hand of our politicians who are gutless in the face of genocide. When I was a kid, I couldn't imagine how the world sat there and watched the Germans slaughter the Jews. It's not so mysterious to me now. You see opportunistic politicians who don't have any principles, who make cutting lousy deals, that are afraid of risking anything. People are being massacred. 35,000 people have been murdered in Gaza. And we're watching it live on TV. What does it take? We're talking about...
It takes Trump. That's what it's gonna take. Because you all heard this morning, Biden turned his song. He's going to push on with this peace. And all of a sudden, the peace deal is, this needs to happen or else.
I'll believe it when I see it.
Me too, but if he wants to win the next election, I think he would be smart to keep pushing
He's
for
dumb.
peace.
Oh, wait a minute. Oh, sorry, that's right. And then
You're
Go ahead.
specific. Lost it?
No, I haven't lost anything. I think we should try to keep in mind There was a gentleman named Otto von Bismarck who welcomed the Jews from Eastern Europe into Germany. The whole concept of the Yiddish language is that curious mix of German and Hebrew. All of those names, Silverman, Goldsmith. Why? It's because the Jewish people at the time had a single name at the borders, because Germans are very half German and half Russian, so I know a little bit of this. Attention to detail. You're going to have two names. What do you do for a living? I'm a goldsmith, and that's we'll give you that name. Silverman. All those kinds of names came from that. So Germany,
Schneider, Taylor.
all of them. Many of them. Gefilte fish. My point is, at that point in time, Germany welcomed Jewish people because people like Bismarck said, this is a very creative, industrious group of individuals. Look at the number of German Jews who got the hell out of Germany as Hitler began to consolidate power. Look at all the whole history of 1900 to 1929-30 Germany is full of arts and sciences of people who were German Jews. Many of them, if they didn't get trapped in a concentration camp, got the hell out. And they went to places like New York and created the vibrancy of that city in many ways. So this is the antithesis of Zionism, but for every action there is an equal and opposite reaction. And we're struggling with that now.
And it's interesting because it was a major problem for the Zionist movement that Jewish emigres from Europe didn't want to go to Palestine. They wanted to go to the New World. They wanted to go to New York and Montreal and places like that. And they did so in huge numbers until the American immigration law of 1924 barred Jews. Or not
1924, no.
Yeah,
Yeah?
yeah, 1924.
All right.
It was a racist law not only against Jews, against foreigners. They clamped down on.
But we have the same history here with South Asians. What was the story of the ship that was in Vancouver Harbor? All of that kind of stuff.